It is finally year-end list season for me. I went through a lot while going back to college. There's, a lot going on, so that's why this video is pretty late. I mean, actually pretty early for my standards, but, late. Yeah, so 2023 was definitely the most full year for movies, at least for me, since I've been reviewing shit. I saw over 90 releases, new releases, which is more than I ever have, which is great. And I feel like we got a good balance of amazing, pretty good, bland, and terrible. And the terrible movies, honestly, a lot of them were pretty entertainingly bad and gave me a lot of stuff to talk about. So that's always great. I feel like the last couple of years I kept saying, like, I barely have stuff for this list. It's all just really boring and mediocre. And that's never fun to talk about. Those movies give me, nothing to comment on. But this year, wow, there was a lot of entertainingly bad movies. And honestly, I kind of enjoyed them more so for that. So let's get into some dishonorable mentions before I get into the list proper. We have The Hunger Games, the new one, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. It was the only reason it kind of made a list is it was so boring and so lifeless and so just obnoxious. Then we have The Outwaters, The Boogeyman, Five Nights at Freddy's. Yeah, unfortunately that's here. Was not a fan of it. The Pope's Exorcist. What is this one called? Somebody I Used to Know. The Exorcist Believer, which I know will be on a lot of other people's lists, but I just found it way too funny to hate. Ant-Man Quantumania, Insidious the Red Door, Cocaine Bear, Renfield, and I guess I'll throw in The Marvels as well. So those are all movies that were pretty bad, but, not bad enough to make the top 10 here. Honestly, some of those I recommend checking out just on entertainment value alone, but we're going to get into the real cream of the crap here with number 10. Coming in at number 10, we have Pain Hustlers. This movie had a lot of potential, I thought. I love Emily Blunt, and Chris Evans is normally pretty entertaining. And any movie with like an anti-big pharma message is something that I'm going to be initially on board with, just because, fuck big pharma. But with this thing, it was so clear that their intentions were to get Oscars. That is the only reason why this movie exists. It is clear-cut Oscar bait, and that is it. There is nothing else beyond the surface. The performances are cartoonish, the story is bland, the visuals are non-existent, and David Yates could not direct if he was giving all of the resources in the world. This movie is worthless and is just Netflix fodder. I've never really been one to kind of say that, because I feel like even at its worst, some Netflix movies have some sort of value, but this year especially, a lot of Netflix originals just gave me nothing, and this movie is the worst example of that. Coming in at number 9 is Meg 2: The Trench. I'm not really a big fan of the original Meg. It has its moments, and people who love it for a certain reason, and I get that reason. Big shark destroys everything. That is fine if you like that kind of stuff. But with this movie, I can't even see how those people will like it, because it barely involves the sharks. That is the main selling point of this movie, yet it went the Jurassic World Dominion route of creating a whole other subplot that didn't make any sense and didn't correlate to what the original fans of the first movie wanted. So the Meg 2 is kind of worthless and just, ugh. Another Netflix original, The Strays. This movie marketed itself as a horror film, yet nothing horrific happened. It was very confused on what it wanted to be and what it was trying to say, and I think that the person who wrote this movie fundamentally misunderstands what a script is, if that makes any sense. There were so many decisions made in this film that felt non-human, that felt like an AI wrote this thing, but a broken AI. It was confusing. There were plot points that were just abandoned halfway through the film. It was visually so bankrupt, and it was just ripping off a lot of elevated horror without actually knowing what elevated horror is. You People has some pretty big names in it. You have Jonah Hill, Eddie Murphy, a couple other recognizable people in the film. And it was trying to do this whole like, oh, we're not so different, you and me, and just face plants again. So many movies this year had admirable, intentions and had pretty okay concepts and just missed the mark on them. And with this movie, I never found it funny. I never found it charming. I never, bought the relationship between the two leads. And it just felt mean spirited for the most part. It's kind of like those stand up comedians that say that they're for diversity and for, inclusion and make racist jokes in their stand up sets. That's kind of the only audience I could see loving this kind of film. Otherwise, it's just a nothing comedy. This one doesn't really give me a lot to talk about outside of Glenn Powell and Sydney Sweeney's lack of chemistry. Both of them are very talented actors in their own right, but they were just not the right fit for each other here, and that really kneecaps the rest of the movie. It felt personalityless. Like rom-coms need to have that, that defining trait. They need to have something that makes them unique. And with this one, it just wasn't there. And I never really liked any of the other cast. The jokes weren't funny. It was never endearing. This was just, again, a worthless movie. And very much felt like an AI film. Out of anything I've seen this year, this one feels like it was made in a factory and not by people who wanted to create something that they were passionate about. In my younger days, I thought that Bert Kreischer was one of the funniest stand-up comedians I had ever seen. But rewatching some of his older stand-up specials, and especially visiting this movie, The Machine, he kind of just runs the same joke into the ground. And while I do think The Machine story in and of itself is very interesting, and he could never take that away from him, I just don't think it translated well to a full-length movie. They tried to fill the gaps with these weird subplots that never really panned out. Mark Hamill was trying, and honestly, Bert Kreischer was also trying, but again, it was never funny. It was never interesting. I never found any part of the movie to be riveting. It took something that was funny on its own, ran it into the ground, and we're left with an empty husk. And honestly, that's kind of how I feel about Bert Kreischer and this movie. And entering our top four here, why do we even try with these Conjuring movies anymore? The Nun 2 was laughably terrible. I didn't really have that many expectations going into it. A couple of the trailers honestly looked pretty interesting, and I really did like The Conjuring 3. I revisited that probably about like a year and a half ago, and I still really liked it. So I had higher hopes for this than I normally would, so maybe that's why it's so high up, but yeah, it just missed the mark. It's from a different era. These kinds of horror movies are very outdated at this point. And again, it's running the concept into the ground, and we don't need any more Conjuring stuff. We don't need to expand on every little bit of this universe, because that's what makes it less scary. And I don't think that the people behind these movies understand that and are just putting them out to make money, and it works every time, and it's so frustrating to have to stick up for those original movies because of how bad the Conjuring universe has gotten at this point, with this probably being the worst offender. Okay, we're really getting into the shit now. These are movies that I really hate. Not The Strays, but Strays was the first movie that me and Cam saw in the movie theater once we got to college, and that kind of set the tone for the rest of the semester because, wow, This movie was unwatchable at times. It was the most lowbrow humor you could possibly imagine, and it never capitalized on such a stupid concept. Like, this could have been okay. This could have been, at least silly enough to kind of be like, okay, that's passable. I'll forget about that. But no, this was like offensively bad. The jokes were in your face, disgusting every single time. And I'm not talking about like, offensive, but they were just gross. Like I felt like a fourth grader who just learned how to curse wrote this movie. And who was this for? Who saw this movie? Was like, yes, this is the kind of comedy I want. Ugh. Our runner-up is Old Dads. This movie is more so sad than anything. Bill Burr, again, when I was a little bit younger, I really liked his stand-up, but revisiting it now and then especially within the context of this movie, he just seems like the old man complaining about the youth and complaining about how, everything's woke nowadays. And it just comes off as pandering. It comes off as wanting to pander to an audience that is the lowest common denominator and picking on people who don't deserve it ever. A comedy is really, really failing when I'm agreeing with the people he's trying to make fun of the entire time. So, yeah, this movie, again, it's not even, like, funny bad at this point. It's just tiring. And it's like, okay, come on, Bill. Like, really? Really? We're doing this again? Our number one worst movie of 2023 is Shazam 2. Fuck Shazam 2. I cannot stand this worthless piece of garbage. I actually was not one of those people who had superhero fatigue up until this movie happened. I kind of liked The Flash. I loved Guardians of the Galaxy 3, which I think came out before. I saw this movie way later than it came out. The Batman had just come out last year. I loved Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness. I was liking, the direction that superhero movies were going in, and then this came out, and I was reminded of, oh yeah, this is what they're going to be pushing from now on. It's corporate. It is lifeless. I cannot remember a single thing about the plot or the characters or a single joke. All I remember is that most of this movie hinges on a Skittles ad, which is infuriating, and it kind of ruins the city of Philadelphia, which is, I live very close to that city, and why does this have to be one of our movies? That's besides the point. Shazam 2, it's here because of what it represents more so. It was so devoid of any personality. It was so devoid of any creativity and so devoid of any sort of heart. This movie was just a cash grab. And that, to me, is the ultimate sin when creating something. When you're just doing it for a paycheck. And obviously, the entire cast, crew, everyone involved in DC with this film didn't want to make it and were putting it out just as a cash grab. And it failed. It failed miserably. This movie bombed. So, again, Shazam 2 is a worthless film that nobody ever needs to watch. Ugh. So that is it for my top 10 worst movies of the year. Finally getting this out to you guys. This one is usually a lot more unscripted. I know I'm really just like to fire off my thoughts on it because it's more fun that way. I like ripping into movies that way. With my next couple videos, I'm going to be doing my top 20 movies of the year. I'm going to be splitting that into two parts. We'll do 20 through number 11 with just me, and then me and Cam will both be giving our collective top 10. So stay tuned for that. Cameron, do you have anything to say?
Strays was the worst.
Yes, it was. Other than that, I hope you guys have had a good holiday, all that good stuff, and I will see you with the next video.